Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 Fall FedEx Bermuda Championship Data Dive Show. We got a lot to dig into. I have a correction from the GCSAA tournament fact sheet from last night. I've also done quite a bit of research, as promised, around TIF Eagle Bermuda greens. We're going to be looking at some prior leaderboards, figure out what metrics are going to play well at Port Royal, and see who the players are that excel in those metrics. And there's been a lot of field changes, so we have a lot to cover. Let's not waste any more time. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from FantasyNational.com. It is the best golf analytics tool out there for your money. It's going to make you a much smarter DFS player and give you a considerable leg up on any golf wagers that you make. So go check out FantasyNational.com. You won't regret it. In the description to the video, there are links to all of the social media. First off, my X and Instagram, where I posted some research earlier today around Port Royal, the TIF Eagle Bermuda greens, a little bit of past performance, and the players that qualify under the criteria that I put forward. So if you'd like to see the weekly research that I do for the PGA Tour, this week for the Bermuda Championship and every week, then give me a follow over at your preferred social media site. X is also where I post my betting cards every week, and that'll be no different. That comes out Wednesday evening after the DFS Tactics show, and I also post my player player exposure percentage. So if you want to see those two things, give me a follow over at X as well. And then speaking of social media and Wednesday evenings, Gabe's X handle is in the description. He writes a very good article called The Fringe. Highly suggest you go and give him a follow and subscribe to that article. It is free to do so, by the way. And if you are a subscriber to his article, you're going to be able to join us in his Substack chat every Wednesday evening as we continue the DFS talk over there after calls. And I do need to thank Gabe, as he was the one to mention to me the GCSAA fact sheet correction. So thanks, Gabe, for that. But go show Gabe some support. Subscribe to that article. Follow him on social media. Lastly, we're live. Chat's open. I want to hear from you all. Have you made any wagers yet for the Bermuda Championship? With the prices that have come out, is there any area of the price board you're focused on, any player you're focused on? And then what do you think is going to play well this week at Port Royal? So let's dig into the weeds of the data for the 2023 Bermuda Championship. And we're going to start, as we do every week, or every Monday, in the Data Dive Show over at Windfinder. Thursday looks very calm. Very little wind. Looks like a repeat of last year. Probably some very, very good scoring conditions, especially considering that this course is very, very short, pretty accessible. So Thursday looks benign. Looks great for golf. 72, low to little wind, so it looks great. Friday, the wind does start looking like it's going to pick up a little bit, and then the weekend is hectic. 15 to 20 mile an hour sustained winds, gusts into the 20s, and then Sunday looks like a lot of wind. 20 to 25 mile an hour sustained winds, gusts maybe into the mid to upper 20s. So it looks like Thursday is absolutely the best day for scoring. And if this forecast holds, which it's going to update considerably from now until Wednesday evening, but if this forecast were to hold and we don't have the super forecast, it looks like the Thursday PM, Friday AM actually has the better portion of the draw. Again, based just on this forecast, which is still 72 hours out from the tournament, so I wouldn't put anything or much consideration behind this. It's just an early look at this forecast, but it does appear that the Thursday PM, Friday AM would have the favorable end of the draw if this forecast holds. But there's a look at the wind finder forecast for Port Royal, Southampton, Bermuda. A lot of wind over the weekend, and it possibly could pick up Friday afternoon. So before we go to Fantasy National, I mentioned in the intro that there was a correction that I needed to make from the GCSA tournament fact sheet. And again, thanks to Gabe for pointing this out. Everything that I have seen as I did some research today around Port Royal, the greens and all that, the GCSA tournament fact sheet lists, at least for this year's tournament, 8,000 square feet. And there have been no renovations, to my knowledge, since 2008, which you see down here. Every other source that I have seen, including past GCSAA tournament fact sheets, list the green sizes around 6,000 square feet, which would take these greens from extremely large, some of the biggest on tour, to average. And that's going to change the dynamic of what we think is going to be important this week. So it's very possible that this is just a typo on the GCSAA tournament fact sheet standpoint, because everything else I have seen is at 6,000 square feet, not 8,000. Everything else is the same from last evening. We're still on Tiff Eagle Bermuda greens, Robert Trent Jones design, Bermuda throughout the course with a little bit of zoysia in the fairways. But the big correction is that these green sizes do appear to be average size, 6,000 square feet, as opposed to very large and 8,000 square feet. So I wanted to make sure I gave you, the viewer, that information, as that was relayed to me by Gabe earlier today. All right, with that, we're going to now move to Fantasy National. And because we saw the forecast, at least that is projected for especially the weekend at Port Royal, maybe even a little bit of Friday afternoon, I have this set for the beginning of 2022 only because there's not enough rounds in this calendar year. But I have the moderate and windy filters selected. So in those conditions, moderate and windy conditions, all rounds, actually, let's bring that into last 36. I apologize. So in moderate and windy conditions, the last 36 rounds, so long as they've been in the past 2 years, our top performers in the wind have been Scott Piercy, Alex Smalley, Adam Scott, Alex Noren, Cameron Percy, Kevin Yu, Adam Long, Thomas Dietrich, Ryan Armour, and Ben Griffin. You'll see a little bit lower, Nate Lashley, Will Gordon. I'll go ahead and show you, so far there have been 12 field changes this week for the Bermuda. Nate Lashley, in no particular order, or at least they are in the strokes gained total of the wind order. Nate Lashley, Will Gordon, Aaron Badley, K.H. Lee, Chesson Hadley, Cameron Champ, Carson Young, Mackenzie Hughes, Eric Van Rooyen, Tyler Duncan, Chad Ramey, and Ryuji Imada have withdrawn from the event. So do make a note of that as you are preparing your wagers, as you start working on your DFS lineups this week. These 12 players have withdrawn. So I will keep those players starred as we move forward throughout the evening. We'll see, or that way you will be able to see if they've withdrawn, and it'll give me a reminder to skip them in any top 10s that they happen to populate in for some various metrics. So anyway, there's a look at the wind wind performance of these players the past couple of years, or almost 2 years. Of course, something else that we know that is consistent with Port Royal, it is short. In fact, it is the shortest course, at least by official yardage, on the PGA Tour. Just over 6,800 square feet, or 6,800 yards is the official yardage. So on short courses this calendar year, our top performers have been Brendan Todd, Adam Scott, Mark Hubbard, Ben Martin, Ryan Gerard, Dylan Wu, Alex Smalley, Cameron Percy, Brandon Wu, and Stuart Sink. Skipping Tyler Duncan, he's withdrawn. Carson Young, Aaron Baddeley, withdrawn. So there's your top performance on short courses. And because of the amount of wind that I see, or that is in the forecast, especially over the weekend, I do not feel comfortable using the easy to par filter. Now, if you want to focus on the cut portion, or if you are a showdown player, especially for Thursday, I think it would be appropriate to use that filter. With very little wind in the forecast, Port Royal's probably going to be very gettable on Thursday, maybe even the beginning of Friday. But once the wind picks up, we've seen, especially in these past tournament conditions, the wind picks up, it can get very difficult. Windy and difficult twice in 2022, windy and difficult once in 2021, and windy and average a couple of other times. So a lot of the defense of the course, especially the back nine, is the wind, because the back nine is more coastal, is more exposed to those coastal winds. And it's probably a good reason, or it goes hand in hand with why 13, 14, 15, and 16 is the most difficult stretch on the course. These are generally more challenging holes anyway. You've got two very long par threes mixed in that would probably be difficult without the wind. You add the wind, they really start to get extremely difficult. So with that, we don't have any strokes gained data, this being in Bermuda. So instead of going to the prior leaderboards immediately, let's cover a couple of strokes gained categories here. I'm going to start with off the tee. I know we looked at driving distance mostly last night. The more I thought about it, the more I'm probably going to have a little bit of off the tee in the mixed condition model, even if I do end up focusing more on the driving distance. So for this calendar year, the past 36 rounds, and I'm actually going to use the short course filter since we know this is a very short course. Our top performers our top off the tee performers on short courses this calendar year: Kevin Yu, Matty Schmid, Doug Gim, Brandon Wu, MJ Duffy, Charlie Hoffman, Brent Grant, Sam Bennett, Ryan Palmer, and Lucas Glover, again skipping Tyler Duncan. So there's your top off the tee performers on short courses. If I were to use a filter, it's probably going to be that one this week for the off the tee. If you want to see just flat out the last 36 rounds, no filter, our top off the tee performers: Brent Grant, Kevin Yu, MJ Duffy, Doug Gim, Trevor Cohn, Luke List, Akshay Bhatia, Sam Bennett, Lucas Glover, and Adam Scott. So quite a bit of overlap here. A few new names: Trevor Cohn, Luke List, Akshay Bhatia rises with no filter, but Kevin Yu, MJ Duffy, Doug Gim, Sam Bennett, all of Lucas Glover, all of those players were top 10 also on short courses. I'm not going to use any filter for strokes gained approach. So our top strokes gained approach players this calendar year, the last 36 rounds in the field this week: Lucas Glover, Mark Hubbard, Kevin Roy, Alex Smalley, Doug Gim, Ryan Moore, Russell Knox, Justin Lauer, Kelly Craft, and Charlie Hoffman. I'm still debating with myself if I want to put around the green in the mixed condition model. I've got reasons for and against it. The main reason against it is that scrambling is simply simply easier here. So that to me diminishes the around the green importance. However, the reasons for including around the green, we've seen the wind forecast that can absolutely cause players to be off or to miss their greens. Even with the size of these greens, the greens are right at tour average to hit, which means on short course, with this being an exceptionally short course, probably looking at a fair amount of chipping or around the green play. So those are a couple of reasons for, a reason against. I am still debating with myself, and perhaps either throughout this show or especially come Wednesday evening with the DFS Tactics show, I'll see and finalize if I'm going to use around the green. So instead, let's go straight into putting, and I'm going to have a few courses here that I'm going to have to highlight for you all. But as promised, I went and looked for pure Tiff Eagle Bermuda courses on the PGA Tour. Now, there are several courses that have Bermuda bases and Poa Trivialis overseed, especially in the beginning part of the calendar year, just due to weather and location. I'm thinking of the American Express, specifically has Tiff Eagle Bermuda and Poa Trivialis overseed. I believe the Valspar might have Tiff Eagle as well. There's a couple places that have Tiff Eagle with Poa Trivialis overseed. So I am focused solely on pure Tiff Eagle Bermuda, as at least per the GCSAA, there is no overseed here. So the first place that has pure Tiff Eagle is Bay Hill, host of the Arnold Palmer Invitational. The second is PGA National, the Honda Championship, or the Honda Classic, excuse me. Third is the Plantation Course at Kapalua. The Century has pure Tiff Eagle. Of course, Port Royal, although we won't have any putting statistics here, I'm still going to include it. And then lastly, and admittedly, this was omitted in my post on social media, so again, thanks to Gabe for correcting me. Sea Island, and the host of the RSM, also has pure Tiff Eagle Bermuda. So I'm going to filter on those specific courses, again, for your information: Bay Hill, PGA National, Kapalua, and Seaside. So the Arnold Palmer Invitational, the Honda, the Century, and the RSM. Those places have pure Tiff Eagle Bermuda greens. And with that, I'm going to back this out all the way to the beginning of 2019, just so we have enough data on the majority of these players in here. We will limit it to the last 36, but we have enough data to figure out who putts best on this surface. So on these pure Tiff Eagle Bermuda greens, your top putters going back to 2019, which is also somewhat convenient considering the Bermuda was in, or the Butterfield Bermuda started in the calendar year 2019. So I went ahead and included the Arnold Palmer, the Honda from that year. Our top putters on Tiff Eagle Bermuda: Patton Kazire, Brian Gay, winner here, formerly at the Bermuda Championship; Trevor Werblio, Dylan Wu, Brendan Todd, another former champion here; Sung Kang, Nick Watney, Lucas Herbert, another former champion here; Martin Contini, however, it is only 4 rounds, but he does rise to now 9th in these rankings thanks to Chesson Hadley's withdrawal. And then rounding out the top 10, David Hearn, who has had some success here at Port Royal. So very, very, very comforting and confidence inspiring to see 3 of the former winners, or actually all 3 of the former champions of the Bermuda Championship and at Port Royal be in this list of top 10 for putting, and the fourth one isn't in here because he's not playing this week. So that does inspire quite a bit of confidence. So there's your top putters on specifically TIFF Eagle Bermuda, and I'm sure that is the filter that I'm going to have for the mixed condition model this week. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get this prepped for the or going through the prior leaderboards, and we'll go to the next page view, which is scoring. Let's go ahead and check, not scoring, fairways and greens. Let's go ahead and check some prior leaderboards and figure out what has played well here at Port Royal over the years. See if we can't glean some insights as to the metrics we want to focus on. So last year, with Seamus Power's win, I'll highlight, the top 22, I guess. There's a couple of players just off your screen. Distance was big for the upper echelon. Everybody in the top 5 was positive in distance, but everybody in 6th through 10th was negative. So it is not mandatory. Obviously, you think about Brendan Todd and Brian Gay. They are not long by any means. Seamus Power, right about field average, maybe a little bit under it. Thomas Dietrich, however, is pretty long. So it can be a benefit, especially since this rough is not difficult to play out of. We go back to the historic conditions. It's always been kept short. So it is not extremely difficult to play out of. The difficulty comes in if the winds are up, you're not exactly able to control your spin. So distance isn't a hindrance, but it's not mandatory, and it's not necessary either. So I'm going to still have a little bit of focus on driving distance, just because historically, when we go to Microsoft Excel, you'll see how important distance has been for the players who have finished in the top 30. But it's not going to be a huge aspect, and that's why I'm still going to use off the tee, because I still want to see players who are able to hit fairways. In fact, if we sort on last year's leaderboard and look at distance, it's somewhat correlating. I mean, you have a top 30 in Shank, your runner-up. Some clunkers of made cuts, a missed cut from Brandon Matthews. So you've got some prime finishes and you got some missed cuts. So it's not the be all end all. Fairways, about the same. Tyler Duncan, missed cut. A middling finish from Brandon Wu, a top 15 from Sean O'Hare. Kevin Yu was third. Grayson Sigg, top 15. So again, not mandatory, but not a hindrance if you're not finding the fairways either. Good drives gained, again, more of the same. And then greens, these are actually some pretty low numbers by green and regulation comparisons against other courses and other tournaments. However, your winner was fairly high up here in terms of greens and regulation. It takes a little bit longer to get to your first missed cut in terms of greens and regulation. You also have a third. A lot more, say middling finishes up here as opposed to some clunkers and missed cuts that rise. So greens might be a little bit something, which also helps explain why the greens are probably 6,000 square feet, not 8,000 square feet. And that correction from last night. So there's a look at last year's leaderboard. We'll take a look at 2022 fairways and greens. Again, your upper echelon finishes, your top 6, were all positive in distance. Spawn, in fact, was so close to field average in distance. I'm actually going to say, 9 of the top 11, 10 of the top 11 were basically field average or better in distance. So it is a factor. It absolutely can be. If we sort on it, again, a lot like last year's, in the sense that we've got some middling finishes, actually a top 25 from Thomas Dietrich, a couple of clunkers, but you have your top 5, and your winner was fairly high in distance. in 2022, along with the top 15, top 10, your runner-up. So distance is a little bit more important than I think a lot of analysts and pundits will probably give it credit for this week. So I'm going to have, again, just a little bit of emphasis on distance, but we are going to be looking at off the tee for sure. If we sort on fairways, you got some cut makers up here, some decent finishes, but nothing in the top 10 until Davis Riley all the way down here. Again, it will help, especially for the days that it's windy, but it's not mandatory, especially since that rough is not difficult to play out of. We sort on good drives, an elite finish here from Rogers, but more of these middling finishes, even a miscut fairly high. Greens, a little bit more correlating, but these are still some fairly low numbers by green and regulation standards. So we're looking at mostly distance in here, probably a little bit of greens. So let me get this prepared for the scoring. And we're going to check this year's field. Our top driving distance players when courses are short. This is, as we'll see when we go to Microsoft Excel, also the same filter and metric combination that I used last year to a mild bit of success. Our top driving distance players when a course is short this calendar year: Matty Schmid, Ryan Brim, Trevor Cohn, Nick Hardy, Martin Traynor, MJ Duffy, Adam Scott, Davis Riley, Brent Grant, and Dylan Fratelli. Again, skipping the players who have withdrawn, who are starred. We'll take a look at greens. We can see I'm a little bit hesitant to use greens when it's short, because then you would start looking at specific proximities, and we don't have that here. And I've mentioned how the scoring easy to par filter I'm not very comfortable with, since the wind is supposed to pick up. So we'll look at this in a couple of different ways. First off, just no filters, just straight on top greens and regulation gained players in the field this calendar year: Lucas Glover, Doug Gim, Martin Laird, Luke List, DJ Trahan, Russell Knox, Mark Hubbard, Alex Smalley, Doc Redman, and Taylor Pendrith. If I were to use a filter, I'm starting to think perhaps greens when it's windy, because the wind can play so much havoc, especially with your approach shots if you're not in the fairway and whatnot. So your top greens and regulation gained players in the wind, having to go back to 2022 to make sure we have enough rounds: Adam Long, Alex Smalley, C.T. Pan, Alex Noren, David Lipsky, Kyle Westmoreland, Lonto Griffin, Luke List, Bryce Garnett, and Paul Haley are your top 10. So there's a couple of looks there at two of the metrics, or the two metrics I'm going to use this week from this page view. I'll have a little bit in distance. I'll probably have a little bit in greens, but I'm going to incorporate off the tee because I want to incorporate the fairways gained as well. I just don't think the fairways are important enough to include on their own. All right, let's look at some scoring metrics. And I mentioned last night that eagles might be something that we want to look at by themselves, considering the amount of eagles here versus other courses, or at least by percentage. But we look at last year's leaderboard. Kevin Yu had a few eagles, it looks like. Harrison Endicott, but it wasn't a huge amount of success for this top 16 here. In fact, it was more birdies gained. Look at Seamus Power, 5 timesing the birdies gained versus the bogeys avoided. Dietrich, birdies gained. Patrick Rogers heavily favoring the birdies gained. Now, Kevin Yu was more bogeys, but he did have several eagles. Ben Griffin birdies. McCarthy birdies. Looking like it's a little bit of the birdies gained. However, if that wind does, in fact, come to fruition, I do think bogey avoidance will play a factor. But if we sort on this, and you got to remember also last year, the first 2 rounds, there was very little wind, which would incorporate very much easier scoring conditions. And that's why these birdies gains numbers probably a little bit higher. But your winner led in birdies gained last year. Third, sixth, second, sixth. So very, very correlating for birdies gained last year. This might be an outlier. Bogeys avoided, not nearly as correlating. You actually have a couple of miscuts up here, but top 10, runner-up. Let's look at 2022 and maybe even 2021, especially 2022, because we had a couple of rounds that got extremely windy, especially round 4 was extremely windy. If we look at the birdies and bogeys gained there, much more even and not nearly the level or the number, the raw number that we were seeing from last year, like Seamus Power's 10.3. And we do have a 9.3 here from Danny Lee and 8.3 from Stallings, but mostly these numbers are a lot lower. Your bogey avoidance is higher. So Lucas Herbert, slightly in the bogeys avoided, but pretty even. Danny Lee, Patrick Reed, birdies. Rogers now heavily favoring the bogeys. Spawn bogeys. Malnati bogeys. So it's close. It's close. And again, not a lot to do with Eagles if we highlight the top 16 just due to ties. You know, Brian Gay had maybe a few Eagles. Taylor Pendrith might have had a few Eagles, but not enough to warrant looking at it at Eagles on their own. If we sort, again, a whole lot of correlation up top. And you did have 2 rounds that were easy in 2022. But, oh shoot, wrong tab. But the bogeys avoided is going to be much more correlating than it was last year's as well. So, interesting debate that we have, or interesting thought process we have now, because I like using scoring metrics with scoring filters. Again, I'm not confident using the easy or difficult to par, especially for the entirety of the tournament, because Thursday looks like it's going to be pretty darn easy. My guess is that the weekend is going to be really difficult if that forecast holds. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do this in the wind and on short courses. So first off, in the wind, our top birdies or better gained players: Ben Griffin, Adam Scott, Scott Brown, first time I think we've said him, Lonto Griffin, Scott Piercy, Davis Riley, Taylor Pendrith, Ben Martin, Kevin Yu, and Justin Lauer are our top birdies or better gained players in the field this week in windy conditions. And in fact, they are the same top 10, really, kind of, with the exception of Justin Lauer, who's 11th. The top, or the same birdies gained, top 10 in birdies gained, just mixing the order. Now, in terms of bogeys avoided in the wind, Ryan Armour, Adam Long, Alex Smalley, David Lingmerth, Trevor Cohn, Brendan Todd, former champion, Doug Gim, Adam Scott, Cameron Percy, and Lonto Griffin. So Brendan Todd more in the bogeys avoided. I thought Brian Gay was in the top 10, so he is not. He, for birdies or better, he's down here at 25th. He hasn't done well with the bogeys avoided in the wind. So there you go. There's a look at bogeys and birdies or better gained in the wind. Now we'll take a look at short courses. And then we'll take a look at opportunities as well. Probably won't include any filter. We'll just take a look at opportunities in of themselves. But one, a metric that I'm kind of leaning towards a little bit this week, probably won't have a whole lot of percentage in it in the mixed condition model, but I'm still leaning towards opportunities. So our top birdies or better gained players on short courses: Adam Scott, Brendan Todd, Matty Schmid, Kelly Craft, Brandon Wu, Harry Hall, Lucas Herbert, Doug Gim, Kevin Yu, and Satoshi Kodaira. If you're wondering why I'm putting emphasis on 2 or 3 players, it's because they are former champions here at Port Royal. Brendan Todd, Lucas Herbert, Brian Gay. So good to see them in the birdies are better gained on short courses. If we look at bogey avoidance short courses, Kevin Roy, Alex Smalley, Thomas Dietrich, Taylor Pendrith, Adam Scott, Ryan Gerard, Peter Quest, Stuart Sink, Dylan Wu, Cameron Percy. Brendan Todd just outside the top 10. All right, but the last thing we're going to look at on this page view, let's take a look at opportunities. Just the players who have given themselves the most opportunities in the last 36 rounds. Alex Smalley, Kevin Roy, Doug Gim, Lucas Glover, Kevin Yu, Charlie Hoffman, Adam Scott, Brandon Wu, Satoshi Kodaira, and Matty Schmid. So it's going to be very important that you consider this, list of 10 especially, but maybe even so on down to the top 25 here. These players who have given themselves the most opportunities combined with the players that were in the top 10 for Tiff Eagle Bermuda putting. I'm not going to be able to go back to that. That's going to take too long to filter on those specific courses. But make sure you combine those two, opportunities gained and putting on the Tiff Eagle Bermuda. And that's going to give you a very, very good idea who is at least going to give themselves the most opportunities, obviously, to perform well. They're still going to have to make the putts, but it's a very good start for this week. All right. No proximity, so we're just going to jump straight into the par 3s, 4s, and 5s. And the par 3s for the top 30 and the top 10s, we saw that they were fairly important. They fell off for the top 5s and the winners, especially somebody like Lucas Herbert. Let me go to 2023. Par 3s, Seamus Power was, a little bit above field average. Rogers, an elite finish, did not play them all that well. Griffin, the same. Now, yes, there were several good performers down below, but it wasn't necessary for elite success. So if we sort on it, 6th, 6th, 11th, 17th, 11th, 17th is fine. But your winner's not up here. You've got, a clunker from Dylan Wu, some missed cuts a little bit lower down here. So there will be a factor. They will be a factor, but it's not going to be a major importance. If there's a specific range, you had a 3.4 from Lingmerth, but again, remember there's only one hole, one par 3 that measures to this length, and look at all the missed cuts here. You have one from 200 to 225, it measures 213 on the card. 2.6, a very high miscut, but look right below it, 6th, 2nd, 17th, 3rd. Still have some clunker of made cuts, but much more correlating. The 225 plus, this is where your cut making and good performances are. You do have some elite performances mixed in. Max McGreevy, Aaron Baddeley, McCarthy a little bit lower down here. 225 is probably where we're going to be looking, more than likely. To 2022, we saw that Lucas Herbert, okay. Lee, Reed, Rogers, they played them well. But, you come down a little bit further here into the top 15, Brian Gay, Graham McDowell, not good. Not good. So they weren't mandatory. 22nd, 4th, 22nd starts off pretty strong, and then you have miscut. So again, they can be a factor, like Patrick Reed, JJ Spawn, Rogers. They're not. It doesn't mean if you're playing the par 3s well, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed success. Austin Smotherman, Stewart, Kim, and whatnot. Again, I'm actually just going to go straight to that 225 plus. A little bit less so correlating, only because we had quite a few miscuts higher up here. But a 4.2 maximum, 2.8, 2.7, and miscuts all the way up on all of these ranges. So 225 more than likely is the most important range. Not sure if it's going to be solo consideration in terms of par 3s. So with that, our top par 3 performers the last 36 rounds. Russell Knox, Lucas Glover, Peter Quest, Mark Hubbard, Brendan Todd, Charlie Hoffman, Andrew Novak, Brian Stewart, Dylan Wu, and Scott Piercy. That's your total par 3 performers. For the 225 plus, MJ Duffy, Thomas Dietrich, Lucas Herbert, Vincent Whaley, Kevin Tway, Saying You'll Know, Peter Quest, Luke List, D.A. Points, and Jason Duffner are your top 10. All right, moving to par 4s, and we saw last night in the course breakdown, and especially comparing to other full field courses, that the 350 to 400 was such an enormous importance. 6 of our 11 par 4s measure 350 to 4. 4 of the 11 measure 400, 450. There's only one par 4 that's over 450 yards. So my guess is that we're going to focus on these two ranges. But you see the importance of par 4s, especially for the winners. Seamus Power, 9.2, probably only trailing Ben Griffin, who led the majority of the tournament last year anyway, and then faltered on the back 9 on Sunday. Yeah, so 3rd, 1st, clunker from Ben Crane, 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th is extremely strong correlation there. 350 to 4s, clunker from Brian Stewart, but 1st, 3rd, 6th, 8th, 2nd, a little bit lower, pretty darn strong there. You got a 6.8, a little bit less correlating, but lots of correlation here in the 350 to 4. If we check the year prior, Lucas Herbert's win, again, 7.2. I see a 10.2 and 9.2. So he's a little bit further down than Seamus Power was, but not by much. And look at that correlate. 12th, 7th, 7th, 12th. 1st, 2nd, 5th, 12th, 12th, 12th. Lots of correlation on these par 4s. Lots and lots on these par 4s. 350 to 4, 7th, 2nd, 30th. So, a top 30 from Saying You'll Know. 12th, 12th, 5th, 7th. Very big. Lucas Herbert, your winner, was a little bit further down, but still pretty darn high on the leaderboard in these 350 to 4 par 4s. 400, 450, a 7.9 from Seifert. He just didn't play the others all that well. But a 7.9, 2nd, 12th, middling, 7th. Winner was also pretty darn high up here. You're seeing that these 450 to 500 just isn't a big factor. It's just not a big factor. So we're going to be focused on these two ranges solely this week for the Bermuda Championship. So your top par 4 performers this calendar year, or in the last 36 rounds, from 350 to 400 yards: Adam Scott, Lucas Glover, Luke List, Brandon Wu, Camilo Villegas, Ryan Palmer, Kelly Craft, Mark Hubbard, Brent Grant, and Lonto Griffin. Probably want to put a star next to Adam Scott and Lucas Glover. They're top 5. In fact, Adam Scott is best on both 350 to 4 and 400 to 450. Lucas Glover's top 5 in both. Chesson Hadley, he's withdrawn. Stupid. Kelly Craft, 8th and 21st. Your top 400 to 450 par 4 players: Adam Scott, Doug Gim, Brendan Todd, Thomas Dietrich, Lucas Glover, Justin Lauer, Jimmy Walker, Matty Schmid, Alex Noren, and Lucas Herbert. So 2 former champions in that list there. So we're just going to be looking at those 2 specific ranges. More than likely, probably 350 to 4 will carry a little bit more weight, but we'll see. Definitely all the focus in those 2 ranges. Finally, looking at par 5s here at Fantasy National. They're important, but everyone's going to be scoring on them, so there's not a whole lot to be gained. Tyler Duncan, a miscut, but pretty elite correlation, surprisingly to me, around the miscut from Duncan. But you see where the majority of the strokes gained are: Rogers, Kevin Yu, Thomas Dietrich. These guys are in the 500 to 550. In fact, the miscut is the more balanced of the 2 in terms of the ranges. Your winner higher in the 500 to 550, 500 to 550. So at least last year it was all in the 500 to 550, and that's generally how it's been. We look at 2022 and the par 5s. Lucas Herbert actually might have led. Yeah, he tied for the lead in par 5 performance. Stallings, Gay, then starting to fall off a little bit here. But again, more of the same. 500, 550 is more than 3 times the importance. Stallings a little bit more balanced. Gay, Appy Barnrat, Ludwig Aubert played this 2 years ago. Much more than 500, 550. So that is going to be the most important range of par 5s, as 2 of the 3 par 5s fall into that range. And the third par 5 is right on the border of it, 553. So I wouldn't be surprised if all of the par 5s play 500, 550 on a day or two. So in the field this week, your top par 5 performers from 500 to 550 yards: Luke List, Sam Bennett, Brent Grant, Kevin Tway, Ryan Palmer, Marty Doe, Scott Harrington, Kevin Yu, Robert Streb, and Stuart Sink. Well, we've said Brent Grant quite a bit tonight. Kevin Yu's been up there quite a bit. So just going off the top of my head on the players that have seemingly been on a lot of these top 10s for the metrics that have matched what has played well historically at Port Royal. All right, with that, we're going to move to Microsoft Excel. First thing we're going to do, since we have had some prior course history at this course, we did not do this last week since El Cardinal had not been seen, but let's take a look at last year's mixed condition model that I made for the Bermuda Championship, see how it went, how predictive it was, and where we might be making some changes. So you see, you would see if I changed the page view. There you go. You see, for my top 20 was pretty good. 4 missed cuts. Mark Hubbard was pretty darn popular. He missed the cut. Callum Tarrant was extremely popular. Missed the cut. Norlander, very unique. Ryan Armour, very unique. But only 4 missed cuts in my top 20. That's the best I've done in quite a while, or at least in the fall portion. So that's promising. I don't have the winner in here. Seamus Power rated out quite a bit lower, down at 66th. His irons hadn't been good. He hadn't also been very good at the 350 to 4 par 4s coming in to the tournament. But you see he was number 1 in bogey avoidance. Another feather in the cap for that metric. But anyway, so I don't have the winner, but I do have Thomas Dietrich, who was extremely popular, but finished second in my top 15. Ben Griffin, Patrick Rogers. So, these top 5 finishes, pretty good. I had a fairly unique Grayson Sigg at second in my rankings. A top 35 from Sang Yul No in the 6Ks. Let's see, other places that might have been okay. Alex Smalley was, projected 11.5%, also finished 11th. So this was good. It was good. It wasn't fantastic by any means. Of course, don't have the winner, like I mentioned. The upper echelon finishers, McCarthy, Griffin, Dietrich, Rogers, they were all pretty common. So I had a few unique plays. Of course, missed on Mark Hubbard, missed on Callum Tarrant, and whatnot. So what did we use, or what did I use last year, and how are we going to adjust? Well, I had 15% in greens on short courses. Makes sense. I'm definitely not going to have 15% in greens. Definitely going to back off the percentage. I can understand using short courses. I also might do the wind and windy conditions. So still playing around with the thought process on that filter, but I had greens. I used proximity. I'm not going to focus on any proximity this week. But I had 15% from 100 to 125, so we must have went through Pro Visualizer last year, and the majority of approach shots came from there. It didn't turn out very well, at least for the players that finished in the top 27 or 28, depending on ties. So no proximity. There's 15% I'm getting back. Did put 15% in 350 to 400 par 4s. Seems a little bit heavy, but they are the most prevalent hole here. and they've been played fairly well, so makes a lot of sense. I put 10% in approach. A little difficult to measure just because we don't have strokes gained data, but I'm always going to have strokes gained approach in my mixed condition model unless the data absolutely tells me I shouldn't. 10% in bogeys avoided. I went 15% in 350 to 4, and I went 10% in 400 to 450. So probably what I'm thinking about this year as well, at least having a little bit more percentage in 350 to 4 than 400 to 450. But we'll see how predictive they were as well. I had 5% in putting. I can tell you that's going to rise considerably, especially since I am going to focus on the TIFF Eagle Bermuda. And when we looked at the TIFF Eagle Bermuda rankings, the top 10, all three former champions that are in the field this week here at Port Royal were in the top 10 for TIFF Eagle Bermuda. So I'm thinking this needs to rise considerably in percentage, maybe all the way up to 15%. Definitely going to be more than 5%. Might be 10 depending on how much percentage I have left over on things, but definitely going to raise the percentage in putting. I did have 5% in distance on short courses, so we'll see how predictive that was. I had 5% in all par 3s, 5% in 225 plus. I think I'm just going to use the 225 plus would be my guess as of right now. And then lastly, I split out the par 5s. I only had 5% in that. Based on the prior leaderboards, though, it probably justifies going to 10%. Probably. All right, how predictive were these metrics? Some were good, some were really bad. Greens on short courses, 43. That's pretty good. We're looking for anything in the mid 40s. You start getting in the low 40s, it's pretty good. You get in the 30s, it's very predictive. So greens was fairly predictive. Prox was a disaster. Surprisingly, the 350 to 400 par 4s were not very predictive. I highlighted Seamus Power and how he had not played those par 4s, or that length of par 4s well. You see, I capped it going back to the John Deere, but I did have the last 36 rounds, so perhaps a little bit of a change in time frame would make some would change that. I'm not sure, but let's see. Some other players here, like Aaron Baddeley, was kind of middling from that range. I'm just trying to highlight the upper echelon of finishers. Sean O'Hare was really bad at that range coming into the tournament. Now, Justin Lauer was number 1, finishes top 10. Kevin Yu was very middling. Patrick Rogers, good. Thomas Dietrich was good. So you can see how, for last year at least, and the Bermuda Championship, the 350 to 4 wasn't very predictive. So we might want to consider that. Might be a fluke. I'm thinking probably more so a fluke. I'm still probably going to have majority of the focus in 350 to 4. At least for par 4s. Approach wasn't all that great either, but I'm still going to have strokes gain approach. I'm always going to have approach in my mixed condition models unless the data absolutely tells me I shouldn't. Bogeys avoided was really strong, especially on shorter courses. 41. That's been the lowest so far. There's one more that's was more predictive. 400 to 450 was better than the 350 to 4, but still not all that great. Putting was not all that great. In fact, the most predictive metric was driving distance. Driving distance on short courses. And that's why I'm a pretty big believer in driving distance being a little bit of a factor this week. I'm thinking probably the same 5% on short courses, but I'm going to incorporate off the tee as well. You look at Ben Griffin, he was 25th driving distance on short courses. Now, McCarthy's never long. He was 66th. Top 20 from Chesson Hadley is a top 20 both finish and coming into the tournament. So that's positive to see. Patrick Rogers was 4th in driving distance on short courses. Justin Lauer was good. Seamus Power, pretty darn good, especially with this field, in terms of driving distance on short courses. So that's where a lot of the belief in the short course driving distance is coming in. The fact that these players can either hit 3-wood and take on some of the challenges of the course, maybe even hit driver, or they're just more adept at hitting their irons longer off the tee to give themselves shorter approaches. Par 3s, 225 plus, pretty darn middling. 500 to 550 was not very good at all, but it's still correct to single out that range. So there's a look at last year's mixed condition model, how it performed, how predictive it was. It certainly was good. It can be improved upon. Obviously, I didn't have the winner in here. You'd like to have no miscuts in your top 20, but overall, we were on the right track. A pretty good mixed condition model, and we've seen that. I'm going to remove this, so that's 15%. I'm getting back. I'm going to incorporate some off the tee. Going to increase the putting, definitely. So we'll see if we can improve on last year's mixed condition model. With that, we're going to move now to some really deep data, specifically around Port Royal. Last night, we took a look at Port Royal and the Bermuda against other full field consistent courses. Now let's just dig into Port Royal in general and see where a lot of these strokes gained are coming from. It's going to be most prevalent in the par 3s, 4s, and 5s, but you still like to go through the course individually. So the driving distance is 11.9, almost a 12. If you remember from last night, driving distance is 30% more important than the full field average or full field consistent course on the average full field consistent course on the PGA Tour. That's why, again, I still think distance is going to be a factor. Really, there was only one year that it was under a 10, and the average, I know the font will be small, the average is about a 9.13. So every single year here at the Bermuda, the distance has been more important than the average. So fairways gained, it was very important in its inaugural year. It's really fallen off. That's why I don't want to look at fairways by themselves. Greens have fallen off in terms of importance consistently through the years. I'll still have a little bit. I don't think it's correct to have 15%, but I'm still going to have a little bit. Birdies and bogeys, these are pretty darn close to full field course averages. Now the bogeys really fell off last year. That's a pretty darn low outlier. If we remove that, bogeys rise to about 12.5%, which makes some sense. Again, remember the first two rounds last year were extremely easy. Now round one, Thursday, at least based on the forecast from this evening, looks like it could play to that. But I don't see the rest of the tournament playing as easy as it did those first two rounds last year. So I'm thinking bogey avoidance is definitely something we're going to need to keep in. But it's hard to ignore the birdies are better gained and how correlating they were for the players the past 2 years and who have played Port Royal well. This is where we're going to gain a lot of insight when we're looking at specific course data. So looking at par 3s, pretty darn consistent through the years. But look at the 225 plus. About 70% of your strokes gained total come in this specific range. So that's why we're looking solely at the 225 plus. 70% of the strokes gained total come into this range here. And this par 3 measures at 213, so they could stretch it out, especially if they think the wind is going to play nice on that day. So I wouldn't be surprised to see perhaps Thursday all three of the long par 3s play over 225 plus. Looking at par 4s, pretty big number here. All of the strokes gained, all of the numbers are in these two lengths. I mean, 0.5 out of a 4.5, so what, 11, 12% of the strokes gained total come in this one hole. That's why we're focused just solely on these two lengths of par fours, and we're not even going to look at par fours in total. We're just looking at these two lengths because of that. And then lastly, similar to the par threes, look at the par fives here. A little bit less than, or maybe right at 30% of the strokes gained total in the par fives come from the 550 to 6. So you've got another 70 to 75% of your strokes gained total coming these 500 to 550 par fives. And they've been pretty darn consistent. So that's why we're focused on that range alone this week for the Bermuda. So there's a look at Port Royal and some specific course detail. With that, we'll close it out. We're going to end the show off going to the early look file and figure out the players who have performed the best, specifically at Port Royal, around some of these metrics. So I do want to look at distance very quickly. So we'll sort by driving distance, and our top driving distance players historically at Port Royal. You got Luke List, only once. There's Thomas Dietrich, a second and a 24th, maybe a 22nd. So he's played very well here. Brent Grant popped on a lot of metrics. Finished 35th last year. Lucas Herbert is a winner. Kevin Yu finished 3rd last year. Davis Riley finished 7th in 2021. Samuel Knowles actually had some success here. Nick Watney a little bit further down here. So I'm trying to highlight the players who have played it at least twice. Alex Smalley, just like Thomas Dietrich, 2 events, average finish of 12th. He's got some distance. So it's not mandatory, as you know, Brian Gay and Brendan Todd, they're never going to be high in terms of driving distance. Having said that, I mean, Brendan Todd is fairly close to field average, and Brian Gay is even a little bit lower. They're never going to be high in distance, but I mean, they're still somewhat close to field average when you think about it. So distance is going to be a small factor. We'll take a look at greens very quickly. Last thing we'll look at on the driving and greens tab or page view. Your top greens and regulation gained players. Shoot. Whoa, what did I sort on? That was wrong. Did I sort on fairways? I probably did. I sorted on good drives. Top tier analysis you get from calls. If you can't even sort his stupid spreadsheet correct. All right. Your top greens and regulation gained players historically at Port Royal. Russell Knox. Average finish of top 25. He's 4 for 4 here. Justin Lauer has had a lot of success. Cameron Percy, some decent amount of success. Alex Smalley again. There's Brendan Todd. He's got a win and a missed cut. Kramer Hickok's been fairly decent. 3 for 4. Average finish of 38th. Pretty good in the greens. Wu, Novak, Tway, a little bit less in terms of success. Actually, Doc Redman. I completely skipped Doc Redman. 2 for 2. Average finish of 20th. Pretty darn solid. So there's your top greens and regulation gained performers. We'll take a look at bogey avoidance from that tab. Your top bogey avoiders historically at Port Royal who have played it at least, a modicum of times. Alex Smalley, Harry Higgs, 1 for 2. Sean O'Hare, 2 for 2. Justin Lauer up there, 2 for 2. Doc Redman. There's Brian Gay, 4 for 4. Average finish of 7th. He's fairly high in the bogey avoidance. I'm just curious, what is his... So he's actually been much more in the birdies, but he's got a fairly high bogey avoidance as well. Dietrich, a little bit more in the birdies gained as well. Interesting. Where's Brendan Todd? And Lucas Herbert's all the way up here. He's only got one time. There's Brendan Todd. He's more in the birdies gained. So perhaps I need to put more emphasis in the birdies gained. Could be. Very, very well could be. But there's your top bogey avoiders at Port Royal. We're going to look at the specific lengths, the par 3s, 4s, and 5s, and then we'll be done. So par 3s, 225 plus. Your top performers at those par 3s, you see they have been mostly all from one time. Max McGreevy, 2 for 2. Nick Watney, 2 for 3. Sean O'Hare. Scott Piercy, a little bit less in terms of success, but Cameron Percy again, saying you'll know. Vincent Whaley, Gomez, Garnett. Your winners certainly aren't up here. Now, these will be helpful for your cut making. They're generally pretty good to help play well, but your top end finishes, other than maybe Stuart Sink and Taylor Pendrith, aren't up here. So they're gonna carry minimal weight. They'll carry a little, but minimal. All right, 350 to 4 par 4s. Look at your number one player, Brian Gay, saying you'll know. Davis Riley one time, Alex Smalley, Brendan Todd. So there you go. I mean, my goodness. Brian Gay, Brendan Todd, top 5 in 350 to 400 par 4 performance. 2 former champions here. Lucas Herbert is 9th. So your 3 former champions are all top 10 at 350 to 4 par 4 performance at Port Royal. Granted, Herbert's only one time. David Hearn has played very well here, 3 for 4. He's high up here. Smalley, again, saying you'll know. Justin Lauer, Thomas Dietrich, Brandon Wu. A little bit less so in Nick Hardy down here at the bottom. But a very, very important range, clearly, from your 3 former champions. And look at these former champions in terms of 400, 450. Brian Gay, not leading, but, very high up there. Brendan Todd's been a lot less successful. Still positive, just less successful. Lucas Herbert played him well as well. So if we sort on the 400 to 450 par 4s, Griffin Griffin leads. He led most of the tournament last year, then again kind of fell off on Sunday. Ben Crane, 3 for 3. Doc Redman, 2 for 2. Playing the longer par 4s well here. I mean, again, Brian Gay is 8th in this particular range. Lucas Herbert is 11th. Let's see. Other player, Malnati, 2 for 2. Average finish of 14th. Justin Lauer, 2 for 2. Average finish of 13th. Camille Villegas, 3 for 3. Lee Biota, a little bit less in terms of success, but 2 for 4 has played that length of par 4 well. Lastly for tonight, par 5s, 500 to 550 yards, specifically at Port Royal. Your top performers, Kevin Yu, Hindicott, there's Lucas Herbert, Vincent Whaley, 1 for 2, Andrew Novak, 1 for 2, both average finish of 47th, so okay, not great. Dietrich, Gligic, actually 2 for 3. Brendan Todd, Justin Lauer, saying you'll know, Alex Smalley, Robert Streb, 3 for 3. There's Jonathan Bird, 3 for 4. O'Hare, 2 for 2. So there's a look at the players who have performed the best at the various metrics specifically at Port Royal. That is going to do it for the show tonight. I will resort on best average finish. That's going to do it for the show tonight. Thanks for all the support. I really appreciate it. Love digging into statistics, trying to give you all some insights from a statistical analyst and data analyst's perspective on how to exploit some of these statistics and where I think some values are. Always appreciate the support. Thanks for tuning in, watching, listening, and supporting the channel by liking the videos, commenting, and subscribing. For all of the wagers you've made so far this week for the Bermuda Championship, for all of the wagers you're thinking about making this week for the Bermuda Championship, and until I see you Wednesday evening for the DFS Tactics Show, may all your bets be profitable.